Hello and welcome to Bach, the Universe and Everything. Last month we overcame the COVID-19 lockdown and brought you our scheduled programme as a digital edition. We were completely overwhelmed by your support and so pleased to make many new friends around the world. So thank you for joining in and being part of this great programme and helping us continue. I told you last time how we came up with this unusual combination of Bach and cutting-edge science. Today I want to say a few words about the chorales that are a key element of Bach's cantatas. Martin Luther started the eminent tradition of chorale singing in the 1520s, and it became one of the great pillars of the Protestant Church, a melodic union that brought communities together as a single congregational priesthood, singing in their own language. Many composers worked out harmonies and arrangements for these great hymns, but nobody surpassed J.S. Bach, whose settings really stand as a pinnacle of artistic achievement. His chorale harmonizations are universally respected as one of the great monuments in the language of music. It must have been so inspiring to come to that church in Leipzig all those years ago and hear household tunes handed from generation to generation being remixed, I suppose you might say, into glorious new sounds. Bach's creative imagination was legendary. He was the grand master of variation. At our live events in King's Place, we teach our audience the words and music for the chorale in our performance so they can join in. Now today, virtual friends are joining our performance from around the world, and if you want to join in too or follow the music, please download what you need from our website or from the description text on this YouTube post. Finally, I want to give a very warm word of welcome to our guest scientist Bill Hanage, who is the Associate Professor of Epidemiology at the Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health. We came across Bill through his brilliant articles in the Guardian newspaper, and we're so grateful that he has agreed to talk to us about Schrödinger's pandemic, his own take on the COVID-19 virus.
Today's reading is from Neil Gaiman's novel, American Gods. I can believe things that are true and things that are not true, and I can believe things when nobody knows if they're true or not. I can believe in Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny and the Beatles, Marilyn Monroe and Elvis and Mr. Ed. Listen, I believe that people are perfectible, that knowledge is infinite, that the world is run by secret banking cartels and is visited by aliens on a regular basis. Nice ones that look like wrinkled lemurs, and bad ones who mutilate cattle and want our water and our women. I believe that all politicians are unprincipled crooks, and I still believe that they are better than the alternative. I believe that California is going to sink into the sea when the big one comes, while Florida is going to dissolve into madness and alligators and toxic waste. I believe that mankind's destiny lies in the stars. I believe that candy really did taste better when I was a kid. That it's aerodynamically impossible for a bumblebee to fly. That light is a wave and a particle. That there's a cat in a box somewhere who's alive and dead at the same time. Although, if they don't ever open the box to feed it, it'll eventually be two different kinds of dead. And that there are stars in the universe billions of years older than the universe itself. I believe that life is a game, that life is a cruel joke, and that life is what happens when you're alive, and that you might as well lie back and enjoy it.
Nichts gebeten in meinem Namen, in meinem Namen. Habt ihr nichts gebeten, bisher habt ihr nichts gebeten in meinem Namen, bisher habt ihr nichts gebeten in meinem Namen, bisher habt ihr nichts gebeten.
Geist und Seele schreckt. Ihr Menschen legt den Zorro, was dahinter steckt. Ihr habt Gesetz und Evangelium vorsätzlich übertreten und dies, was mögt ihr ungesäumt, in Buß und Andacht beten. Schuld
Seid getrost, seid getrost, seid getrost, seid getrost, seid getrost. Ich habe die Welt überwunden. Die Welt überwunden. Seid getrost, seid getrost. Ich habe die Welt überwunden. Die Welt überwunden.
Hi everyone, my name is Bill Hanage. I'm a professor of epidemiology at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health, and I work there in the Center for Communicable Disease Dynamics. And it's my pleasure to be talking to you today, although I have to say it's not my pleasure to be talking about the situation which is engulfing all of us, which is, of course, the COVID-19 pandemic. The title of my talk is going to be Schrödinger's Pandemic, and I'm going to be trying to explain some of the things that I do as an epidemiologist, and also some of the challenges which confront us when we're actually looking at a public health crisis like this. So I've written a few notes on the screen behind this one, which I'm going to be looking up to refer to from time to time, just in order to guide me as I go through it. Two of the most frightening diseases in public discourse are SARS and Ebola. Now, both of these have a very high mortality rate, and both of them, when I say SARS, by the way, I mean the original SARS back in 2003. Both of these have a high mortality rate. Both of them cause a considerable amount of anxiety and panic at the time that they have been causing large outbreaks. Neither of them have caused a pandemic. And the reason is quite simple. If you look at if you look at the amount of transmission which occurs before people are aware they're infected, in both of them, there's not very much of it. So Ebola has very, very distinctive symptoms. And so if you avoid people with those symptoms, then transmission is unlikely to occur. Similarly with SARS, transmission was linked to the symptomatic period. And so people taking moderate social distancing, relatively moderate social distancing, were able to bring the reproductive number down below 1. Now let me think about 2 other examples. HIV and influenza. Now, in both of those cases, it is possible for people who do not know that they are infected to transmit. And as a result, both of those cause far more infections than the other two, than Ebola and SARS. And the amount of death that they exact, the death toll they exact, is considerably higher. So the ability to control a disease is crucially linked to whether or not people can transmit it without being aware that they have it. And that does certainly appear to be the case for COVID. We've known this for some time. The exact amount is remaining to be nailed down, but it is it's one of the most important things that people should know about the pandemic. It's also one of the most important reasons why social distancing is about the only way we have of slowing the spread at the moment. Because if you treat everybody you know as if they might be infectious, then you're much better able to get a hold on it, and you're much better able to slow infection, to drop that reproductive number. I mentioned the reproductive number. What is it? Well, the reproductive number is the average number of infections you expect to proceed from a single infectious case. So the basic reproductive number, which is sometimes written R0, or almost always written R0, is what you'd expect if you were to drop an infected person into the middle of a completely susceptible, well-mixing population, on average. Now, the R0 varies between diseases. I mean, and you have to estimate it as well. So for mumps, for instance, it's maybe 6 or 7. For measles, it's about 18. Estimates for SARS or CoV-2/COVID vary, but they are in the range of like between 2 to maybe 3.5, possibly even 4. And this is expected because R0 for a disease is not a universal constant like pi or speed of light in a vacuum or the charge on an electron. It is not one of those things. It is not always the same. It depends upon the transmissibility of the disease and the number of contacts that you make that could transmit it. Got a little bit of math here. This here shows you the equation for the effective reproductive number, RT. And it's basically R0 multiplied by the proportion of the population which is susceptible. And that, obviously, in a new disease would be the entire population. So just to point out, if we imagine that there is some of the population which is immune, completely immune, that would be given by 1 minus X, because X is a proportion of the population that is susceptible. If you then want to bring the reproductive number below 1, such that each case infects only one other case, then that means the effective reproductive number, RT, should be less than 1. And then we just rearrange the above equation, and you can get 1 minus 1 over R0. That gives you the population, the threshold which is required for the population to have what we term herd immunity. I don't like that term, but not for humans, certainly. But it's about, it is a determined concept from epidemiology. So what would that threshold be for COVID? Well, if we assume that the reproductive number is about 2.5, which is towards the lower side, as I said, that would make the number somewhere around 60% of the population would need to have been infected and be immune. We don't know exactly how immune people are going to be after they've had COVID infection. There appears to be a spectrum of severity. We don't know if people who have it worse have better immunity. We don't know if people who have it more mildly have less. I mean, that has certainly been suggested. This is stuff which is going to need to be found out over the period of the next few weeks and months. I will note that even in the case that you were expecting that perhaps 30% of the population had been infected in the first wave, that would not drop the reproductive number RT below 1. It would still be around 1.75 or something like that. So we have to be ready for the fact that the pandemic is not over. The pandemic has been started. We've had an initial surge. We have to be prepared for a future in which the disease will be with us for quite some time, and we're going to either have to be working to keep it out or working to avoid the threat to healthcare. I now want to say a few words about Schrödinger's pandemic and why I called it that. Schrödinger's cat is a concept from quantum physics, which is often used to try and explain something that's very weird. The concept of the cat is basically that you have a cat in a box, which is fully ventilated, of course, so the cat doesn't suffocate. And then there's a gun pointing at the cat, and the gun will go off if a quantum event occurs. Quantum events are inherently very complicated and difficult to explain, but it could happen. Say there's a 50% chance it could happen, a 50% chance it might not happen. Before you open the box, is the cat alive or is it dead? Well, the concept, the thought experiment was explained by Schrödinger as saying that before you open the box, the cat is actually both. Because it's only when you open the box that you determine whether or not the quantum event went one way or the other. That's the nature of quantum physics. It's an extremely fascinating and complex thing, and I want to point out I am eminently not a quantum physicist. But there's something similar here. Here, when you look at the early stages of the pandemic, there were multiple combinations of parameters that would be consistent with what we were seeing. Consider, for instance, when you're trying to figure out R naught, you're often looking to see how quickly the number of cases are increasing. Now, that's not only a function of the underlying disease, it's a function of a lot of other things like testing. If you start looking for it more, you'll find it more. Something as simple as that. So the awkward thing that we were trying to deal with was the question of how much, how quickly is it going up? Is it that it is very transmissible, but taking a long time to start new cases? So do you get like 3 new cases over the course of a week, say? Or do we get 2 new cases per infection, but over a shorter time period, the generation time? And you can see that it's increasing, but you don't know the details. You can't figure it out. There are multiple combinations of parameters which are compatible with the data. The same thing was true of asymptomatic infection. You look at the data, you think very hard about it and wonder, could there be asymptomatic infection? But by definition, testing is hard to do at the start of this, and you're going to mostly see the most severe cases. So, while you cannot rule it out, you don't know that it's there. And it's very difficult to then accommodate things like that in your models. So, at that start of the pandemic, and to an extent still now, there are lots of things that we do not know about the disease, we do not know about the virus, and multiple different things can be compatible with what we see. And until we know more about them, it can be very difficult to be absolutely nailed down exactly what is going on. Early on, it was not clear whether we were in one part of parameter space or the other. However, it did become clear fairly early on that you could actually see something that was a risk to healthcare. And so my own message has been always, rather than worrying too much about the models, I think the models are going to be really important, don't get me wrong, but rather than worry about them, worry about the risk to healthcare and start taking actions early on. There's another thing about models which it's important for you to know, which is that models are not destiny. They are one, or perhaps a range, depending on how complicated they are. They are possible futures, and they tell you the likely things you can do, the levers that you can push in order to choose which of them you're going to end up in. And of course, as soon as we've published a model, as soon as we've started studying it, again, as with quantum physics, we've interfered in the system. We have changed what we might be seeing. The very publication of a model which tells you that there is a risk of severe mortality may make some people start to behave differently. So what you get out will be different from what you were expecting in the first place, because all of these things depend very much upon the assumptions that you put into them. So I'm going to close by saying a few words about what I think is important in a pandemic. What I think is crucial is firstly to understand that you are in a world where there is a dangerous virus, and that even if you are relatively unlikely to be affected, other people may be in a category where they are very likely to be affected. That, in this case, happens to be people with pre-existing comorbidities or the elderly. Now, allowing the pandemic free rein is going to cause huge strain to healthcare systems in and of itself. But there's a lot of things that we can do to stop it. One of the things that we can do is sort of be honest with ourselves about what this means and what it's likely to mean for the future. We can then help our communities. We here are collecting groceries and things like that, which we're able to, if we're able to go shopping, we get more than we need, and we put it out to be picked up and taken to families in the suburb of Boston, which is called Chelsea, which has been extremely hard hit at this point. So, if you are young and you have older neighbours, and you feel comfortable going to get groceries, you can do shopping for them. There's a whole load of things that can be done, not, both on the scale of the very low, sort of simple, practical things, and, of course, on the level of all of those healthcare workers that we should be applauding every day, who are putting their lives on the line in order to care for the sick during this. Now, that's all I have to say. Now, I want to point out I don't have a Bach t-shirt, but I do have a David Bowie t-shirt, which I chose to wear. I'm not sure that they are quite the same sort of musician, but at least it's a musician. So I hope you all stay well. Remember, wash your hands for 20 seconds several times every day. Remember to enjoy reaching out to people. This can be physical distancing. It doesn't need to be social distancing. And finally, take care of yourselves and others.
Hello again. Just a few quick words of thanks from me. Thank you to all you magnificent people who supported us last time. Your donations made the biggest difference to us. Genuinely, they made the music happen today. Without you, without question, there would have been silence. So your help is having a huge impact. It is keeping music and musicians alive, and it's going to be a long, long haul. So we're depending on your support. And of course, thank you to our wonderful musicians. Aren't they brilliant? Thank you again to Zen for his technical wizardry. And a big shout to Bill across the pond. Thank you for your fantastic contribution to our series. Oh, and hats off, by the way, to our partners, the Institute of Physics and the Mathematical Institute in Oxford. They've been great friends to us in this series. And a thought and a word for our friends at King's Place. That is a lovely venue, and it's a huge shame that it's closed at the moment. And thank you, finally, to all you good people for joining us again and being part of this series. And you know what I'm going to say? If you haven't, do press that button and subscribe and see if you can get someone else to do it as well. And one way or another, we'll join you with an even bigger and better Bach, the universe, and everything.